Marcus Williams, the 53-year-old CEO of Horizon Airways, had a habit that surprised many. Every few weeks, he'd book an economy ticket under his own name, without fanfare or special treatment, and fly like any other passenger. Today was one of those days, and as he walked through the terminal at O'Hare International Airport, no one gave him a second glance. He liked it that way, blending in effortlessly, dressed in his favorite worn jeans and a plain gray hoodie. His dark skin and unassuming demeanor made it easy for people to overlook him, just another black man traveling alone. Marcus wasn't interested in being recognized. He wanted to understand the experience of his airline's passengers, especially black passengers, to see firsthand the challenges they faced. He'd started at the bottom himself. Years ago, he'd worked as a baggage handler, often braving the cold winter mornings in Chicago. He knew what it meant to work hard, to go unnoticed, to be judged by the color of his skin. Today, as CEO, he still carried those memories with him. Marcus approached the counter for a cup of coffee. "Black coffee, please," he said, offering a warm smile to the barista, who barely looked at him, her eyes sliding past him to the white couple standing behind him. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but he made a mental note of her demeanor. This was why he took these flights, to see the real face of service, to know where things needed improvement, especially when it came to addressing racial biases. After finding an empty seat near Gate B22, Marcus took out his laptop, intending to get some work done. But soon he found himself watching the activity around the gate, two gate agents working diligently, a young black couple struggling with their toddler and stroller, visibly flustered. One of the gate agents, a white woman, addressed them sharply, her impatience evident. "You need to move to the side," she snapped. "You're blocking the line." The couple apologized quietly, their discomfort plain as they tried to comply. Marcus shook his head slightly, scribbling down a note in his notebook. A notification buzzed on his phone. He'd been upgraded to first class. Marcus frowned slightly. He usually declined these automatic upgrades. He preferred to stay in economy, where he could truly observe the typical passenger experience, especially how black passengers were treated. But this time, he didn't have the chance to change it. When boarding began, Marcus joined the line for first class. He stood behind a businessman in a tailored suit, who was loudly arguing on his phone about a missed meeting. Ahead of Marcus, a young mother, a black woman, tried desperately to calm her crying child, her face flushed with embarrassment. "It's okay," Marcus said gently, offering her a reassuring smile. "I remember those days. He'll probably fall asleep once we're in the air." The mother smiled back, her shoulders relaxing a bit. It was moments like these that reminded Marcus why he loved traveling like an ordinary passenger, to feel the human connection, the little interactions that could make a difference. When he reached his seat, by the window, Marcus settled in and watched the boarding process unfold. He noticed how a flight attendant, a white woman named Karen, moved through the first-class cabin, greeting passengers. Her demeanor changed subtly, depending on who she was talking to. She offered the businessman next to Marcus a warm smile, her tone courteous, deferential. But when she turned to a young black man across the aisle, who wore a hoodie and sneakers, her smile faded, her tone clipped. "We'll begin service once we reach cruising altitude," she said curtly when he asked for a glass of water. The young man, clearly uncomfortable, slumped back in his seat, plugging in his earbuds. Marcus watched, his expression giving nothing away, but his mind was busy. He'd seen this kind of behavior before, subtle discrimination, the way service quality changed depending on someone's appearance, especially if they were black. He made another note in his notebook, his jaw tightening. The flight took off, climbing steadily through the clouds. Once the seatbelt sign was off, Karen returned to the cabin, responding immediately when the businessman beside Marcus pressed the call button. "A Bloody Mary, please, extra spicy," the man ordered, and Karen nodded, smiling brightly. "Of course, sir." Marcus watched as she hurried off to prepare the drink, her demeanor pleasant, attentive. He glanced at the young black passenger across the aisle, who was still waiting for his water. Another flight attendant, a young black man named Chris, moved through the cabin with a genuine smile, helping passengers regardless of their appearance or where they were seated. Marcus noticed how Chris assisted an elderly white woman from economy, helping her stow her bag even though he was technically assigned to first class. Marcus appreciated his attitude, the kind of service he wanted Horizon Airways to be known for, genuine and without discrimination. Karen returned with the businessman's drink, setting it down with extra care. When she turned and saw the young black passenger signaling for her, her expression soured. "We'll start beverage service soon," she said without even fully turning to face him. The young man looked down, clearly embarrassed. Marcus clenched his jaw, taking a deep breath, deciding to remain silent for now, continuing to observe. A while later, a black woman from economy, visibly pregnant, made her way to the first-class lavatory. Karen intercepted her quickly, her voice authoritative. "This lavatory is reserved for first-class passengers only. You need to use the facilities in the back." The woman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but there's a line at the back, and Karen cut her off, gesturing firmly towards the economy section. "Policy is policy." Marcus watched as the woman turned and waddled back down the aisle, one hand on her lower back, her discomfort clear. He wrote another note, his pen pressing harder against the page than before. This was exactly the kind of behavior he needed to root out, the rigid enforcement of rules that lacked empathy, disproportionately affecting black passengers. As the flight continued, Karen's demeanor remained the same, warm and accommodating to white passengers, distant and dismissive to black ones. When she reached Marcus's row, she looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly as they flicked over his casual attire. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice tinged with suspicion. "Could I see your boarding pass?" Marcus looked up from his notebook, his expression calm. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "I just need to verify your seat assignment," Karen replied, emphasizing each word as though speaking to someone who might not understand. "We've had some confusion with seating today." Marcus sighed inwardly, pulling up his mobile boarding pass. "Here you go," he said, holding up his phone. Karen scrutinized it, her frown deepening. "This must be a mistake," she said. "Our premium cabin passengers usually present themselves differently." She gestured vaguely at his hoodie and jeans. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Usually what?" he asked quietly, genuinely curious to hear her response. "They usually dress more appropriately," Karen said, her voice faltering slightly. "Let me check with the gate agent." Marcus watched as she hurried off, whispering urgently to Chris in the galley. Chris looked uncomfortable, glancing towards Marcus and then back at Karen, trying to calm her down. Moments later, Karen returned, holding a printed manifest, her finger running down the list of names. "Mr. Williams?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "That's me," Marcus replied, his tone still calm. Karen's face flushed slightly. "There must be some mistake," she insisted. "Perhaps another Mr. Williams." "No mistake," Marcus said. "I was upgraded just before the flight." He paused, then added, Would you like to see my frequent flyer information as well? Chris appeared again, trying to gently guide Karen away. Karen, maybe we should. No, Karen snapped, cutting him off. This needs to be sorted out. We have standards in first class. She turned back to Marcus, her voice growing louder. Sir, if you've manipulated the system to get an upgrade. I haven't manipulated anything, Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying more weight now. And I think we need to be very careful about making assumptions about passengers based on their appearance. Karen's expression faltered, her authority cracking. If you're going to be difficult, she said, her voice rising, I can arrange for security to meet us in Seattle. A few passengers gasped. The threat of calling security was not something to be used lightly, and everyone knew it. Marcus shook his head slightly. Karen, he said, his tone firm now, I'd be happy to show you whatever documentation you need. But first, I'd like you to explain exactly why you think I don't belong in this seat. Be specific, please. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly struggling for words. Well, it's just, you're not. I mean, our typical first-class passengers. Yes? Marcus prompted. Our typical first-class passengers are what? The cabin had gone completely silent. Even the businessman next to Marcus had put down his phone, watching the exchange. Karen's face flushed deeper, and she looked around, realizing for the first time that all eyes were on her. They maintained certain standards of appearance, she said finally. It's my job to ensure those standards are met, to protect the premium experience. Marcus closed his laptop slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. And tell me, Karen, he said softly, how exactly do you decide who meets those standards? By the color of their skin? By what they're wearing? Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Finally, Chris stepped forward. Karen, he said gently, let's step into the galley. Karen hesitated, then nodded stiffly, allowing herself to be led away. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Marcus leaned back in his seat, letting out a slow breath. He glanced across the aisle at the young black man, who gave him a small, appreciative nod. Marcus returned the nod, then picked up his notebook and began to write. By the time they landed in Seattle, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Karen had not returned to first class, and Sandra, the lead flight attendant, had taken over, her demeanor warm and inclusive. Marcus knew there would be meetings, discussions, and consequences. He wasn't interested in punishing Karen, he wanted to change the culture, to ensure that what had happened today would never happen again. 2 months later, Marcus stood at the front of a training room at Horizon Airways headquarters in Chicago. The room was filled with flight attendants, both new and experienced, all gathered for a special training session. Next to him stood Chris and a young woman named Mia, who had been a passenger on the flight that day and had agreed to share her story. We're here today to talk about the power we have, Marcus began, his voice steady. The power to make someone feel seen, heard, respected, or to make them feel small, invisible, less than. What happened on Flight 347 was a failure, not just of one person, but of our culture. And that's something we have to change. He paused, looking out at the faces in the room, many of them nodding. Every passenger who steps onto our planes deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, he continued, not because of who they are, what they look like, or what they're wearing, but because they're human beings. And that's the standard we're going to hold ourselves to, every flight, every day. The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Marcus knew it wouldn't be easy, that changing hearts and minds took time. but as he looked at the people in front of him, he felt hopeful. One flight at a time, they could make a difference for every passenger, regardless of race, status, or appearance.